We are going live and we're gonna wait because we always get cut off. Do 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 boop a doo boop 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 a doo boop a doo.
Wow. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody who's in America.
Yes, actually there was a couple, I think it was Colin and Mike's episode was trending in Finland, so shout out.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys are eating on this Thanksgiving.
Their normal foods because they don't celebrate Thanksgiving.
Dried fish. Salted fish.
What the hell is dried fish?
I don't know. You remember on The Amazing Race when they were they were somewhere up there in the Nordics and they had to eat like this salted, disgusting dried fish that looked terrible.
But I'm really happy that you actually remember something from The Amazing Race because you always tell me how much you hate it.
Yes, it is.
And that shows me that you are actually paying attention a little bit.
It's nice because you get to learn about other cultures.
That's why I love it. And it's competition. And I wish it was something we could do once, but we never could.
How mad would we both
we'd murder each other. We would come back not a couple.
No, it would be terrible. We're both competitive, but also want to be in charge. So that's really a bad combination.
Yeah, but it works on a podcast. Look at that transition back to today's episode.
Is that what we're here for?
Yes. Oh, maybe
we're not going to talk about the
maybe it's a TV critic podcast.
Probably.
But if you like kind of lame-ish shows, watch The Amazing Race.
No, I think
or watch Jeopardy like Dan.
What?
Jan always complains that our podcast come on during Jeopardy time because he's an 80-year-old man who doesn't know DVR.
I think Dan's probably one of the last people I thought would be
into Jeopardy.
What's a Jeopardy fan? A Jeopard maniac?
Trebek'er.
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that.
Wow, this is a great
Theportcitypythons.com. You can support this ridiculous podcast to keep on rambling about random things like we do. We have shirts available. We have springtails available. I think we're going to do a little something for Black Friday. Maybe we'll go, last year I think we did 40% off all shirts, and I think that was borderline psychotic. But maybe we'll do something close to it again. I think we pretty much, I put him to the point where like we broke even on the shirts, which isn't that useful if you're worried about actually trying to make money, but it is fun getting our shirts out there and a lot of people bought them. So we'll probably do something similar.
Probably keyword.
Yeah, keep in mind this is like 3 days before.
And it's Tuesday and we haven't thought about it or talked about it at all.
Yeah, life is too crazy.
But we have talked about our podcast this week with you see I'm doing real good in the transitions, but not the follow through.
Yes.
With Chris, who we've met through Instagram.
Yeah, so Chris, not only does he keep and breed corn snakes, but he is also a zookeeper. So Chrish McIntosh of Enterprise Snakes, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And tell us how you got started in reptiles.
Thanks for having me. I am pretty much like a lot of other people that got into this. I started out with a very big interest in like dinosaurs when I was younger, and I also always had a pretty big interest in anything that was kind of creepy crawly, insects, bugs, spiders, all that sort of stuff, and kind of transitioned once I got old enough to realize that I was never going to have a pet dinosaur. The next best thing was a pet, reptile, and that's when I kind of started really gaining that interest. And not to mention, I have some family members who have had a big interest in snakes. My uncle used to have boa constrictors when he was younger, so that also kind of gave me a little bit of a push as far as reptiles goes too.
What was the first animal that you kept?
Garter snake? Well, no. I had anoles when I was younger. I got them for Christmas one year. I really wanted snakes, but my mom has always been terrified of them. So my aunt thought lizards is probably the best thing, and she brought me to anoles. Obviously, not knowing how shitty anoles can be as pets, especially green anoles. I know some of the other anole species can be fine, but green anoles are god awful. And then after that, I think I had emerald swifts, and then kind of took a little break from college, and then that's when it's when I really started going all in on the snakes.
I think that's kind of funny that there was a time to where people got their first reptile, and now I think it's so often that they're steered to the crested gecko or the bearded dragon that are seriously like good pets. But back in the day, it was like you get an anole, you get a random wild caught lizard, you don't know what it is, but it's always small and fast. And it's like, why were we always keeping these things that were like not a fun experience?
Yeah, I was also like 10 years old and just really like, I had been like looking at stuff about reptiles, but I wasn't really very like in depth with like care and stuff like that. So I just had these two tiny lizards that couldn't really, was afraid to open the cage because I thought one of them was gonna bolt out of the cage or something like that. I think my parents ended up feeding them for the most part, which probably wasn't the best care on my part, but again, I was 10, so I didn't even know any better. But yeah, eventually, I don't know, I think they maybe lasted probably maybe a year, which was, but yeah, I probably should have started with something a little bit better than green nose, but also my aunt didn't know any better either.
So you started off a little rocky, but now you do it for a living, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, turned it around.
When did you decide that you wanted to pursue it professionally?
I kind of, when I got to college, that interest in animals persisted, throughout, obviously till now. But when I got to college, I also am a big sports fan. So I started off interested in sports management, a degree in sports management. But once I actually got into the program and realized it was dumb and I didn't want to do it anymore, I left, and then I started thinking about, why not trying, I have a real passion for animals. There are careers that you can pursue working with them. So I went that route, and really from there really seemed to enjoy like the classwork, and I did internships and stuff like that. And it really kind of cemented wanting to pursue it as a career.
So zookeeping, it's common to have a 2-year degree, 4-year degree, or what does it take kind of to get your foot in the door?
Nowadays, you have to have, especially if you're going to work at one of the the AZA accredited facilities, they want some sort of college degree. 4-year degree is preferred. I have an associate's degree, so obviously it's worked for me. And there's a lot of schools, like especially community colleges, that have the 2-year degree that are more specifically for people that want to do zookeeping. So they're starting to kind of have a specialized. There's a Santa Fe Teaching Zoo down in Florida, and there's also Davidson Community College in North Carolina that are basically, and I think there's a couple, there might be one in New York and one in California that you basically get a 2-year degree in animal care.
But those are programs to where it's respected to the point to where you can get into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So to where it may carry as much weight as a general biology degree as something,
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of those programs, since they're tailored to zookeeping, you also work in all your internships and stuff like that. So you basically get your internships while you're getting your degree. So it probably would be a little bit easier right after you graduate to actually pursue the job.
Because there's like a required number of hours and things you have to do, right?
Not necessarily. Okay. I usually, if people are asking, I usually recommend doing like 2 or 3 internships if they're interested and want this is what they want to do for their career, just so you get all the prior experience that zoos are looking for. And also a lot of times when people do graduate, and even if they do the internships, the zookeeping is highly competitive. There are a lot of people vying for a small amount of jobs. So sometimes you even have to kind of take an animal care job that isn't zookeeping, which is the route I took. When I graduated, I had to apply to like 30 or 40 zoos.
Wow.
And didn't get a single interview. That's how competitive it is. So I actually took a job working at an animal lab at Duke University first, just to get 6 months of paid animal care experience.
And is that basically just cleaning after rodents?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Sounds so fun. So exciting.
It
worked, right?
It worked, yeah. So it was worth it, but it was pretty boring.
Is that something to where when you first got into it, I mean, did you expect to have to just basically clean up after animals all day, or?
I had done it, like the internships beforehand, so you get basically, that's part of like doing the internships. Especially for me, it was my first internship. I hadn't fully decided whether I wanted to pursue zookeeping. So it really kind of gave me like an opportunity to kind of figure out like if this is exactly, what I want to do, get like all the hands-on stuff, realize that, it's labor intensive and there's a lot of cleaning involved, and it's not, I pretty much knew that to begin with, but it's not all, just playing with the animals and that sort of stuff. It's, can be pretty tedious and grueling at times.
So what was your first internship?
I did an animal care internship at the Good Zoo in West Virginia. It's like a very tiny accredited zoo in the Ogilvie Park. Like, it's a resort in West Virginia, and they have a zoo, which was probably, a good place to start. A small zoo, you get to work with everything. It's much more kind of, you get to work closer with the zookeepers, much easier to kind of pick their brains and get, feedback from them, rather than working somewhere where you might see a zookeeper once every hour or so, and you're kind of stuck in one spot, working with a certain group of animals rather than kind of getting the ropes, learning the ropes with everything.
So even with the internships and stuff, you didn't get that initial zoo job. So what you obviously had to be willing also to like relocate to do internships and for jobs and stuff like that.
Yes, yeah, that is a very big thing, is especially if you want to try and work in an accredited facility. They're not like, there's 3 in Maryland total. There's, 1 in Delaware. So they're pretty few and far between and pretty spread out, unless you live in a big state like New York or California or Texas or something like that, or Florida. So yeah, you have to be, for the most part, I kind of lucked out because I got one in Maryland and I'm from Maryland, so a job there. You do have to kind of, while it's nice to be able to work where you live, sometimes you do have to, if you really want to be a zookeeper, relocate to get a job.
So that first job at Duke, you actually moved to North Carolina from Maryland?
So I was already in North Carolina because that's where I was going to school, and that's where I got my degree at a community college down there that had an animal care program. So it wasn't much. I was already down there, so it wasn't much of a transition. But yeah, then after that is when I did that for 6 months. That's all the job was basically a 6-month temporary position. That's all I ever wanted because I didn't want to do it any further than that. So.
And where did you end up working with Nathan, who we had on a couple of weeks ago?
Oh, yeah. I also, while I was in school down in North Carolina, I did an internship at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Yeah. And he was, I guess they're called technicians or whatever, but he's basically their version of a zookeeper at the time. So I worked pretty closely with him there.
So obviously things like reptile breeders, like we're pretty close knit. We know each other. Zoo workers, zookeepers, do you guys kind of know each other?
Yeah, it depends. I'm still pretty close with and know a lot of the people that I interned with when I interned in West Virginia. And then you kind of, through like professional development and things like that, you kind of meet other people that have kind of the same general interests as you. I went to amphibian school recently at Detroit Zoo, and I met a lot of people through that. Met a lot of people on the forefront of amphibian conservation, amphibian veterinary medicine, stuff like that. So we kind of generate contacts that way and try and kind of keep in touch. But usually the good thing about zookeepers is if you're visiting an area or zoo, something like that, you can always just be like, hey, anyone, work here, have time to show me around or whatever for a few minutes, and that sort of a thing. And they're usually pretty willing to take the time to show you around because zookeepers usually like to hang around with other zookeepers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Excuse me. Earlier you mentioned how competitive how competitive it was to get a job at a lot of these zoos. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's because of the just lack of a space? Like there's not enough zoos to hire all the people. Oh, gosh.
or just that many people.
No, that wasn't my other one. Thank you for trying to finish my sentence. Or is it that the people hiring at these zoos are very particular about the people that they want working there?
I think it's probably a bit of both. Because they get so many, applicants for, one job, they have the ability to be very stringy and picky with who they prefer to hire.
That makes sense. They get to say no to 50 people to find that one because they know there's always going to be 50 more people.
Yeah, exactly.
Who want to. That makes sense.
So how did you, obviously, we're talking North Carolina, West Virginia, Maryland. When did you start building your own personal collection throughout all this time?
So once I moved back to Maryland again and started working where I do now, and I had kind of a spot solidified in a job that I was hoping to be at for the foreseeable future is when I really started to kind of start. I didn't initially start with corn snakes, but I started building collections with other things, and then kind of made its way to the corn snake route.
So what was can you explain some of that? What kind of species you tried, why you ended up going for corn snake?
So I started out with Asian rat snakes. I had
I was just
done.
waiting for you to say ball python, but okay, that's interesting.
I did keep 2 ball pythons, and it didn't last very long. I just ended up they weren't for me. I prefer bluebirds. So I did that. I did have 2 ball pythons very shortly. Realized that it wasn't for me. But mainly Asian rat snakes. I kept the 3 bred. Kept and bred the 3 different Madagascar hognose species. For a little bit.
So is that sorry, is the Madagascar giant hognose, that's one species?
Yeah.
Is the speckled also in Madagascar?
Yeah. And then it's the giant, the speckled, and the blonde hognose are all the Madagascar species. And then I also had a couple Western hognose for a while, and then I found out I react to hognose bites. My hand swelled up past, like, my head swelling. I got bit by one, head swelling up past my wrist for like 4 days. So that wasn't going to fly. I didn't want to have to go to the hospital on my own dime for a hognose bite again.
Was that a Western, or was that one of the
a
Mad
Western?
Hogs?
Yeah, a Western. But I still had other rear fang species at the time, including like Barons racers and stuff like that. So at that point, I basically said, let's kind of nix that just in case. And
have you had adverse reactions to anything else, like even like bee sting, stuff like that? Anything
no,
like that?
never. Then typically they say that people that react to the hognose bites are usually those that are like allergic to bee stings, and I'm not allergic to any of that stuff. So it's kind of a bit of a surprise. So basically, at that point, I started kind of looking, keeping something that's, relatively easy to keep, since I, work 40 hours a week. Don't really have, I have some time in the afternoon, but like after work, but I didn't have a ton, and I wanted to be able to do, other things outside of work and just taking care of my collection. So corn snakes were an easy thing to keep. I do keep a couple other like random species. They're the ones that are all behind me. The corn snakes are all kind of to my right. But I keep a few things that are just for fun. But corn snakes make up the main part of the collection.
Sorry to bring it back, or to like bring it dark a little bit, but like, do you think, as far as like the hognose go, obviously they're sold at every reptile show to any single kid, they're sold to plenty of kids all the time. Is there something that we can do or should do to stop from, like, what if you were, that 10-year-old kid and you got a hognose as your first pet, and then you had that same reaction?
I honestly think it was kind of a stroke of bad luck that it happened. That hognose had never bitten me before, and it was just, bad luck. It bit me, and it got me perfectly. That it got those rear fangs like right on the first go, and it took long enough for it to get, for me to get it off my finger, that it was able to do its job. So they're typically like great snakes, pretty calm. There are some that can be a little bit of jerks, but I think they're still fine, and it's not like, overly common for people to react to it anyways. So I don't see any problem with that, being a pet for a younger kid.
Gotcha. Because I don't know, like, I've never, obviously we had hognose, but I could never really see them biting us for any reason. They're kind of...
like I said, it was just the wrong time of day. I don't know. It was more hungry than it usually is, and maybe I don't even remember the circumstance other than it was kind of later in the day. Maybe had been feeding other snakes and just forgot that I was and didn't wash my hands or something, and it just smelled a rodent and went for my finger, but I think fine otherwise.
Yeah. Now, how with the mad hogs and everything like that? I mean, how was it trying to find groups of those initially?
So it wasn't actually at the point in time that I had them. Madagascar was still pretty wide open, so it wasn't overly difficult to get a hold of them. There were, I don't know, 5 or 6 importers that were bringing in hognose. The giants were the easiest to get a hold of, and the speckled and blondes were a little bit harder to find, but at that point in time, it was still relatively easy. I had a pair of the giants, and then I had trios of blondes and the speckles.
Wow, so you had a good group of animals there.
Yeah.
And did you have to mess with doing any treatments or internal, external?
I did. Did treat. I did treat external. I probably should have treated for internal parasites, but I kind of kept them because they were imported pretty kind of separate from everything else, and I usually took care of them last. So at that point, I wasn't going back to do anything else. So I was more concerned with like mites and things like that that could really kind of carry throughout, the rest of the collection and really devastate a collection rather than anything internal, since they're already living with it and seem to be doing fine.
Yeah, I don't know if people realize that obviously these animals always have these internal parasites. Obviously, such a large amount of animals come from the wild, from imported and stuff like that with parasites or things like that, and it's just the very fact of living in the natural environment.
Yeah, if I was keeping them in the same vicinity as my captive bred stuff, I probably would have been more on top of treating them for internal parasites too, just because who knows what a worm from Madagascar would do to a corn snake or any other thing that's lived in captivity its entire life and is from North America. So it's just they were kept separately, so I didn't really press it too much.
And what kind of success did you have with those guys?
I got the giants to breed once. They're typically anything from Madagascar, rain equals breeding, so you just have to mist them pretty heavily, and basically daily mistings. Maybe I think I did it twice a day for a couple weeks, and got the giants to breed, and then produced, I think we had 6 offspring viable, offspring from them. But I didn't really have a ton of luck. I got eggs from speckled female, but they ended up being duds, and then I didn't ever get anything from the ponds.
Because that's something that I've heard. Mad hogs are hard to produce altogether, but I've heard people say that they have had success with the giants, but I haven't heard many people say that they've had success with the others.
I think I recently have seen a few captive bred blondes and speckleds out there, but they do, like you said, they seem to be pretty few and far between. Not very common.
Yeah, I was just taken back when I first saw that speckled. It's like that one really, I really enjoy that animal. I don't know if I'd enjoy keeping it, but I like looking at it. They just seem like kind of a handful.
The giants were definitely a handful. The female was probably like 5 feet long or something ridiculous like that. They're pretty big, and they can have an attitude sometimes like a western or even the eastern can have. But
they're actually like athletic.
Yes,
they're not like the eastern.
No, they don't just flop.
Or...
They don't just flop around. They're actually like, yes, athletic, like you said. They can actually, if they're in a mood and they don't want you around, they'll come at you to let you know.
Yeah, they're crazy, awesome little animals. And then, so would you kind of how'd you go about starting the cord snakes? Was there particular projects you were interested in or anything?
At that point, when I first started, there wasn't. I kind of just perused like Don Soderbergh's available animals and a couple other breeders, what they had. Really looked at like what adults were available at first, and just picked out stuff that I liked. It wasn't until probably 2 years later when Don was selling off a lot of his buff stuff that I really started to get pretty particular about what I was purchasing and what I wanted to keep collection wise.
Yeah, I feel myself saying buff stuff maybe a little bit too much. But
Yeah.
That's but I always refer to it the same way. Like, yeah, we got some of that buff stuff. And
I get looks sometimes at some reptile shows when I say that.
But it's like, yeah. So, what struck you about the buff in particular? Just that it was something new, or
it was something new. I think part of the intrigue was that there wasn't a whole lot of combinations being made or had been made yet. So there was that opportunity to kind of like be on the forefront of producing different combinations and kind of just like being able to play with all the genes and see what happens.
And I mean, I haven't seen, and it's bad because I have buff, but what combinations exist right now? Because all I really see is AML besides, I mean, I know you have some other stuff, but I saw that stuff. But AML buffs, I mean, I see that everywhere. People call them oranges.
Yeah.
But I don't really see much of anything else.
So when I was first getting into that buff, that was pretty much email buff and hypo buff were pretty much the two things that were, and buff to Sarah were pretty much the three things that were really produced so far. But as far as I know at this point, I mean, I have a few things tucked away.
Dude, that red factor buff is just ridiculous looking.
I have a snow motley buff, buff to Sarah. I have an older AML buff. I have 2 buff to Sarah motleys. I have an anery buff. I have, like you said, the red factor buff. And then a few things that I produced this year. I'm not entirely sure. As you probably know, buff can be a pain in the ass sometimes to try and figure out what's going on.
I have way too many of these damn animals just trying to figure out what they are, dude.
Yeah. So I have what I think is an anery dilute buff to Sarah. I have for sure an AML buff to Sarah motley, maybe a dilute buff to Sarah, and then possibly a dilute buff to Sarah motley. Those are all my holdbacks from this breeding season. So they're starting, and I also have Sun-Kissed buff too, and that's another breeder out there that does breedings with buff. Has been doing a lot with Sun-Kissed and buff, so I know he's produced hypo Sun-Kissed buffs and Sun-Kissed buffs as well.
Yeah, I may need to see some pictures of the Anery dilute buff.
Yeah, I can send you some pictures.
But I'm not so I'm not the only one who has a little bit of trouble with it, and
I mean
it's just so subtle.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely I've gotten to the point where I'm probably 80% success rate as far as like picking them out when they first shed out. But yeah, typically to really start to see the colors come through, you have to give it like 1 or 2 sheds, which can make it for some people less desirable as far as breeding goes. But once you see what it produces and what it makes, especially a super vibrant orange snake that pretty much holds that color their entire life. Hopefully, it'll become a little more common for people who just want to keep a pet snake.
Yeah, and I'm always confused at pretty much what we cater to as well, because I think corn snakes are in that. I think it's a fun range to where you can sell a snake to someone who's looking to breed it. It has amazing genes, all this other stuff. But you can also find someone who's willing to buy a pet for that same price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to be the nice thing. Although I feel like it's still, it's for whatever reason is still being, overshadowed by all the, even though corn snakes are still, super common, it's still getting overshadowed by ball pythons and bearded dragons and leopard geckos and all that. Purely, I find it purely just based on the fact that when they're hatch out, they're like 6 inches long and weigh 3 grams instead of like a ball python that's twice as big. It's something a little bit easier. I know a lot of people, especially if they're buying the first pet for their kid, they're going to go with something that kid can't easily squish in their fingers. But I think it's kind of they're slowly regaining the popularity that they seem to once have, and hopefully kind of continue that way. I think colubrid in general are starting to make, with the new stuff that corn snakes are producing, and then like your western hognose, and even some of the like rare and uncommon stuff that is becoming a little bit more common and bred a little bit more readily. They're gonna hopefully kind of rise up a little bit more in the next few years.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, to me, it's kind of disappointing that people, when they get their first pet, go to buy, even though ball pythons are cool, I'm sure, but I mean, I don't know. Corn snakes will certainly escape most enclosures, and I try to, how many times do I tell people, and it still happens, but besides that, I mean, they're so much easier to keep.
Yeah, definitely.
And like, to me, I think it's better for the animal to be kept well. And once they're on frozen thaw, they're typically on frozen thaw, and they'll eat every time. And therefore, the person's happy. They're not stressed out. And it's just, to me, they're like the perfect pet snake. Maybe if we sold them all at like a year old, maybe maybe
that might help.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just like I can show someone a baby and then show someone a one that's a year old, and people gravitate towards the one that's older all the time.
Yeah.
It's just like intimidatingly small. So what other stuff, do you have any other projects?
No, not, I mean, it's basically just mixing different things with buff, and I've started a few projects. So basically I have a few holdbacks like buffs and normals, head for shatter, head for lava cinder, that sort of stuff. Then I'm basically kind of starting things from the bottom, but other than that, I don't really, just because I don't have a ton of space I kind of just have decided to kind of focus on like the projects that I have and not really, you know, taking, you know, expanding too much. Most of what I have at this point is buff or something that's going to fit into a project. And usually a lot of the stuff that I have is stuff that I've produced and raised up and just, you know, purchase something to kind of plug and play with the genes involved.
So do you know, what do they consider buff to be dominant or incomplete dominant?
I don't think we're really sure still.
Because I know people like to throw dominant on corn snake genes that are, you know, when most people would go straight for incomplete dominant.
I from what I gather, I think the opinion is that it is incomplete dominant. But I don't think we're still entirely sure. I know people have done buff to buff breedings, and I've done it myself, and I haven't seen anything like visual, like, you know, pop out that's any different to indicate. So I don't know if the super buff just looks like a buff, but then you breed it to a normal, and you're just gonna, you know, get a crap ton of buffs or something like that. So I don't really know.
I did A-male buff to A-male buff, and it just made my life fucking hard. There's really not much difference.
No, there is. I mean, from what I can tell, there isn't any difference.
Which is like kind of sad, because that goes for most of the dominant / incomplete dominant. They don't seem to have an obvious super form. And I don't know if people are going back and breeding it, because I've heard people throw around super tessera or tessera for people in the chat who hate the way I say that. There's like, I haven't seen any proof one way or the other. Like, no one's proven out tessera that was bred to a normal that produced all tesseras. And if they have, then I just haven't seen it. I mean, it's been around enough that I'm sure someone has.
Yes, I'm sure if someone had done it, it would have already been done by now. Unless someone's just keeping it a secret and doesn't want to share with everyone else.
Which I don't know what there's to benefit. Maybe you could sell
I don't know either.
A couple more $150 snakes, I guess you could sell. I don't know. But are you trying to? Is that kind of a method of yours? Is to get? It looks like a lot of people have put buff into like your brighter genes, but are you trying to kind of infuse it into some of the darker stuff as well?
I do a lot with anery. I think it does wonders to anery. It basically just like infuses a crap ton of yellow into it, makes it like basically extends the yellow that they usually have, anery usually have, and makes it a lot brighter. And hopefully I'll have some cinder stuff here in the near future to see how that goes. And I also have a friend in Canada who's done stuff with charcoal and buff and produced some. I think he's might have produced the charcoal buff to Sarah. We're still kind of figuring it out. But he did it from a trio of corn snakes buff trio that I sold to him and regretted it ever since. It was, I don't know why I did it. It's a buff. Their buffs had hypo, possible had terrazzo, charcoal, something or other, and he's produced probably charcoal buff to Sarah's, terrazzo buffs, all of this other weird stuff.
Wow.
And as soon as I saw the picture, it was like, why did I do this? Why did I sell them?
Yeah, that definitely happens. But
yes.
Have you seen, because charcoal's supposed to, take out your red coloration, and then charcoal in particular takes out, there's none of that yellow. So what does buff that's supposed to enhance yellow, I mean, how does it interact with a gene like that?
So when you mix it with a lot of the darker genes, it seems to basically just like really lighten up what should be a lot darker. So the anery, it's more of a subtle gray color to it. with a lot of yellow in it, because it basically, I mean, for the most part, buff also gets rid of a lot of red pigmentation, unless you're, working a red gene back into it. So it basically kind of even more mutes the red than just the anery would do. So basically just kind of makes it a lot lighter, even lighter than it should be. So even though you're kind of playing with a gene that's typically darker, it's a lot lighter than it usually is.
So we're probably getting way too deep in the weeds for the non-corn snake folks. But I'm wondering, like, because I never thought of it the way that you said it, is that because I always saw it to where you put buff in with amel and it's mixing that yellow with the red pigment, which is making it more orange. But you think it's actually kind of reducing some of those red pigments as well as enhancing some of the yellows.
So pretty much the general thought is it's hypoethristic, so it basically mutes red. Pretty much all the buffs that I have are basically orange and brown, except for the red factor, because obviously red factor is involved, so they still have some of the red. But yeah, they basically have no red at all. So I, for the most part, think it's just basically when you work it in to, those darker genes that basically get rid of red, it just doubles, what that gene's already doing. And instead of the anery gene kind of keying off of a red color, it's more keying off of the browns and the oranges, so it kind of makes it a lot lighter than it normally would be.
So are you getting lighter? So are you getting a more like muddied looking anery, less black, or?
It's kind of I think it's a kind of a cleaner look. It's more of like a light gray. Less black. It's more like kind of, at least with the anery, it's much more of like a light gray color, like almost like I guess maybe like I don't know different shades of gray that well, like kind of like a slate gray or something, a little lighter tone to it.
Cool, because I've never seen any of that stuff, so it's good to know. And I'm trying to figure out what do I do with my buff stuff, because I have way too many amel tesserae red factors that may or may not have buff in them. And I even have yearlings now, and two of them I'm pretty confident, and the others like I don't know, even at a year old. But I think that's just because of some of the Miami infusion from which has made my life hard, which I should have known. But
yeah, it can be a pain in the ass sometimes.
So what else do you have corn snake wise? Obviously you got to have like shatter stuff hanging out, but do you breed any of that to other stuff other than buff?
Not really. Occasionally I'll have just some, especially if I want to like try and work stuff into a project, I'll get a pair of Normal's het for shatter or something like that, just so I don't have to buy a bunch of shatters. I can just produce my own. But for the most part, I just kind of keep to the buff. I do, like, the one thing I do have is I have a palmetto, and that's just because I really wanted a palmetto. Not that I really care what I breed it to or anything like that.
Right. And how do you look at like projects when you're getting started?
I pretty much, especially like with buff, it's kind of up in the air. I don't really know. I just kind of look at different morphs that already look appealing, and kind of like I'm a big fan of shatters, and a big fan of lava cinders, and big fan of Sunkissed stuff. Just like looking at snakes that I already like combos that I already like, and deciding to kind of go with those and see what happens. And then I already get to kind of produce the stuff that I like as a byproduct if they don't have buff in it, and get to produce those combos that hopefully have buff in it. And someday actually we'll figure out if it does have buff in it, but for the time being, it's kind of like, oh, that one looks really weird. It doesn't look like it should be if it was just the combo without buff. So I'm going to go with that it has buff in it and keep it and see what happens in a few years.
Right. And what do you do with those animals that are, say, het 1 million different things, but maybe a normal, or is a possible buff het for, all these different things?
So I will typically, what I've started to do more recently, if I produce some what I think are buffs het for all those genes, I'll probably keep 1 or 2 females back, and then I'll try and find a male kind of the same age that's from someone else that at least has a few of those genes, or at least the core genes that I really want to try and bring out from another breeder, so that I kind of don't really muddle genes too much, and just kind of stash them away in the holdback rack until they're big enough, and then kind of find some room in the adult rack and then try things out. But yeah, that's typically my lava cinder project. I kept a bunch of the weird possible buff stuff that I produced this year is all had lava cinder. So I just bought a pair of lava cinders from another breeder that's local, to hopefully that are also 2019. So I don't just have a random adult male taking up space, where I could have another adult for the breeding projects that I have, and kind of just have them to work in later on when they're all big enough.
And do you at any time say you had 30 babies of all those hets? I mean, are you selling them as hets? Are you wholesaling? I mean, what are you doing?
Depending on how many offspring I produce. I don't produce a ton compared to a lot of the other breeders. Like typically hundreds what I max out at. But usually I'll do like a show, or do it my initial push selling on like Morph Market and stuff like that. And once everything starts to die down, I'll typically reach out to the person that I wholesale to, and I'll wholesale like 20 or something, just to kind of clear out a little bit of space, and kind of rework things, reorganize, and then hopefully get to do another show or two before I make another kind of wholesale sale.
Yeah, because I know we missed you at the Baltimore show.
Yeah. I'm hoping, I'm doing Repticon in January.
I think we bought that table already. So
yeah, I bought the table already too. I made sure that I got a table this time. I just waited way too long, and I did the Mid-Atlantic Reptile show, the one that's in Carlisle. And
oh no. How was that?
It wasn't bad. I always seem to get stuck next to the people that have like the 40 billion imported animals. So everyone kind of just glosses over the corn snakes to see all like the crazy weird things that are probably going to die in like 3 days. but I mean, people still bought some corn snakes, so as long as they at least make, $10 profit, I'm fine with. The show's good in my books.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're always you never really know with shows. The more shows we've been doing, the more it's been all over the place. And we've been trying to look for like, what show's the best for it, because obviously we're selling some pets, but we also, we're also not on the cheaper side for the pets. So I just didn't think that Carlisle show was a big show. So
it's a small venue. They still drew in a decent amount. I mean, it's not anything compared to like Reptile or Hamburg or anything like that. But it still brought in a decent amount of people. But yeah, I've gotten pretty particular about the shows that I do. I've made the mistake of booking a show in Pittsburgh and driving all the way up there and not selling anything. So basically, it was. I think it was probably like almost a 3-hour drive from where I living in at the time, there and back. It was told like 6 hours plus the show time. So it was definitely a rookie mistake. And
those are the ones that just like crush you. You're just like, I don't know if I ever want to do this again.
That was definitely the last time I was ever doing that show again. Or driving anywhere near Pittsburgh. I'm not really fond of Pittsburgh to begin with, so I don't know why I decided to do a show out there, but I was just...
Pittsburgh, Baltimore seems like that would be a rivalry. I don't know why.
Yes, it is definitely. So I basically do Repticon as much as possible, since it's literally like 15 minutes away from where I live right now. So it's like right up the street. It's easy to get to.
It's a good show.
Yeah, it's a good show. Gets a lot of people. I've done Hamburg like twice. I always try and split a table with someone when I can, just because it also brings in a lot of people. But that's usually the 2 shows, and then the Mid-Atlantic Reptile show, I just really needed to do a show because I had a lot of snakes left, and it was, it's not overly expensive to do, so, and it's also an hour away, so it's not that big of a drive.
Sometimes it's like these tables can be like $50 or $75, and it's kind of worth the shot to see how it goes.
Exactly. Because if you sell, one snow corn snake, you basically, paid your, what you paid for the table.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, anything after that is a little one less snake in your racks, and then a little bit of extra money for whatever you might want to purchase or save it or something. Dinner. Don't have to starve yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And so Mike, to go back a little bit, we were talking about red factor, buff, some of those things that are pretty nuanced in how they're expressed. So Mike was saying, I always like to hear what experienced breeders like to or think of red factor, strawberry, red coat, all that stuff that seems pretty much different, the same, all different types of these. I've heard people call them enhancer genes.
So I don't really like the red factor buff is one of the first times I've really ever done anything or had an animal with red factor. To me, just like looking at it and comparing it to other buffs, I think it enhances. It definitely enhances the color. It's a lot brighter orange, and it's still got that nice red color to it that a lot of people like. So to me, that's probably my opinion on it. It's an enhancer gene. I I've never really worked with strawberry. To me, I always thought red coat and red factor were synonymous. So I
Yeah,
can't really
from what I've heard, red coat's supposed to be like a darkening gene. So say red factor is an anery, then you're gonna get that like pink tone to it.
Gotcha.
And if red coat's an anery, you're gonna get a very dark animal.
Darker, okay.
But I feel that is largely theoretical because I've never seen I haven't seen many red coats alone.
I don't like I've
and
never
that's supposed
seen,
to be
like, a single
recessive.
red factor. Yeah.
And I don't know, man.
That's probably something to ask like Don or I don't know, Walter or something that has been doing stuff with corn things for as long as I've been alive.
Yeah, and then it's like where's the line with polygenics? So like we have things like mask, which
I can't.
so we have animals that are showing some degree of, I mean, the same thing that say animals with Keys lineage have.
Yeah.
But also, and I mean, I've done this myself, is that it is passing on through generation, but what amount of that, I don't know, is that influence? But I've seen, like, I've done mask to mask or mask to something that doesn't have mask, and I've gotten a sliding scale of expression. Mm-hmm. So I've gotten what some people would call a super mask, in quotations for those who aren't watching, or you know, a regular mask, or a normal who has all of its head pattern. And you'll see that, you know, they'll have a varying degree of slits down the belly as far as no pattern there, right? It's going to be those checkers are bifurcated. They're kind of, there's whiteness in between there. There's just a blank slate a little bit in between. And then I see some like red and stuff coming on the belly, but ultimately it seems like much more of a sliding scale rather than say, oh yeah, that's a mask and then that's a super mask. It's so much more fuzzy than that, at least I have seen, and I feel like kind of everything's like that, which is kind of a little frustrating.
Yeah, it can be, yeah.
And how many people are willing to talk on podcasts and stuff for 2 hours about this stuff? I don't know. But what are you, as far as, because obviously now you have a red factor buff, which is amazing. Yeah. Just a crazy, amazing animal. But it's like, who would have ever thought that worked out like that?
Yeah, I when I see half the stuff that I end up producing, I'm like, I wasn't really expecting it to be like this. So anything besides the stuff that I already knew, like the oranges and hypo buff, everything's kind of just a surprise is how it turns out. But the red factor buff is definitely a big surprise, especially since it retains so much of that red color to it, and it's a lot brighter than some of the duller oranges that you get with normal buffs.
And what animals are you pairing up this coming up season?
So it's a red factor buff het fire, and I have a hypo fire stripe female that is about 2.5 years old. So once he gets a little bit bigger, he's going to be going with her. And that's pretty much all I got picked out for him at the moment.
Yeah. Well, you're ahead of me. I have 0. I'm just trying to get ready. I'm just trying to get ready for brumation, which I'm supposed to do like tomorrow. So what do you? When do you typically brumate your animals?
So I've already started. I typically start in November and start warming them up in end of February, beginning of March. And I don't do anything super fancy or anything like that. I just basically lower their heat until it gets to the room temperature and then cut it off, and then kind of just let whatever the room gets to be with, just the normal fluctuations. usually nothing lower than like 65 degrees for that amount of time period, and being off food seems to, at least for me, do the trick. I know a lot of people put them in a closet and put a fan on them and, you know, drop them down into the 50s, which I mean, is also perfectly fine because they get lower than that in the wild and seem to do fine too. But it's just with the kind of the setup that I have, that seems to be the best, because I also in this room have, you know, things native to South America and Asia that I don't want them to get that cold. So
right. So at a certain point, you're kind of you're finding a happy medium that kind of works for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you think that maybe, I mean, if we didn't brumate the animals, I think we could probably breed corn snakes, right? You think?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of people having success without brumating, so I don't think it's an issue, and I don't think it's overly important. I mean, it seems to have a little bit of a better effect, at least in my opinion, but they seem to still breed fine without brumating, from what I hear. So I mean, it's, other than it's just simulating a natural behavior that they would experience in the wild, the snakes in captivity probably would be fine.
I think it's also nice for us not to worry about our snakes for a few months.
Yeah. It saves a little bit on the feeding bill, not having to feed adults for a few months.
Right. Yeah, and that is always it's a nice time. I love this time of year when, well, not yet for me, but for you, but when those animals go down in brumation, and then I kind of start intellectualizing more of my collection than actually having to work on them. So therefore I'm able, like, I like to go through the animals that I've held back, because I don't brumate my grow outs. I don't know if you do.
I don't either.
So like I work with them so much that I'm like, I can plan for the future a lot more, because those other animals aren't, you know, taking up a lot of my time.
Yeah. I usually, with any of my adults, they're kind of typically just in random order a lot of times, but usually right before brumation, I kind of slide them around and kind of organize them a little bit more, so that, you know, the male is right above the females that he's going to go with, so it's not as much, you know, trying to figure out who goes where. It's basically just like a male goes down one tub and then down another tub and then he goes back in his tub, and they're all kind of right there. And that usually is my time to kind of plan and figure out exactly who's going to go with who the next year.
And what is your typical feeding schedule, and how do you bring them up out of brumation?
So typically I'm a little, just based on, you know, being a zookeeper and doing it at work, I do it a little slower than probably some people do. I usually, when I start to raise up temperatures, I basically bring it up a few degrees every day or every other day, until they're at 88 degrees for their hot spot or the warm side. And at that point, I start feeding them. Typically, when they're right out of brumation, I give the females like probably like a small adult mouse every 5 days for, you know, the first couple weeks, and then once they start to shed and, you know, go through all the normal processes, is when I start to kind of get them on adult mice again and get them ready, you know, kind of sized up for breeding season.
Right. And then when do you start, or, well, I guess it's hard for corns because I want to go through all the breeding questions, and they're all like they're so step by step as far as how to breed them, and like they give you all the signs. So clearly you're not going to start pairing them before they've shed out of brumation or anything like that. But do you give them a go that first shed that female has? Do you start introducing?
Typically I'll kind of test it out. Once they go through that first shed, and as long as they've been eating normally, I'll throw a male in there and kind of just see how they kind of interact and whether or not he's really showing interest in her, or she's, just trying to, get away and doesn't want anything to do with them. Usually, to me, that's just, they're a little too early, and then I'll just kind of pull the male out and give them a few more days or a week, and then try it again. And then typically, once I notice males, showing signs of, wanting to breed, and females not really fleeing as much, and that's usually typically the time to really ramp up breeding and really start to get males introduced to females.
And do you introduce in separate containers? Do you put male with female, vice versa, any of that?
I put the male in with the females, and I just use the tubs that they're in. I don't really worry about trying to put them in something separate. Usually, I just don't have a ton of extra stuff.
I do, and it sucks. I always have empty tubs stacked up all over the place. So yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah, so I just basically let them breed in what they have, and it seems to be working fine.
Is that like an overnight thing? You keep them in overnight, or you just watch them for a while?
I typically will leave them in overnight. If I don't see any signs, I'll check on them every once in a while. And if I don't really see anything throughout the day, I'll still leave them in overnight, but then the next day I'll kind of pull them out and let the male take a day or two and then try them with another female. But if I do see active breeding, I'll usually typically leave them in for a couple days, just to make sure that everything works out like it should, hopefully.
Yeah. Now, I find that when I put them together, if they don't kind of breed in the first few hours, it seems like they aren't very willing to breed, or just the female isn't receptive.
Yeah. I do see that. I usually typically get females that start to really, when the male first goes in, they're really just start to flee, and they're kind of just going throughout the entire tub just to really try and get away from the male. But usually after a few males or a few hours or so, she usually just settles down, and that's usually when they actually copulate and they start to breed. So I like to give them extra time just to kind of, because typically when you first put the male in, she's just what the hell is going on? Why is there another snake in here? And usually they realize that, oh, it's not something that's going to eat me or whatever. He's just, got to, breed and then he'll be gone, kind of a deal.
Yeah, it's kind of terrible to say, but at least the first copulation is a little rapey. It's always a little forceful.
Rough. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like that, and then it seems like some of the older females are just hanging out, and then they just let them go for it. But
it's you see it most of the older female breeders that I have, it's kind of just oh, it's happening again, kind of a deal. They're not trying to get away as much. But yeah, a lot of the first time breeders, they're usually just what the hell is going on, and why is there another snake in here?
Yeah. Have you had males bite females or anything like that?
I did for the first time see my snow buff motley.
That's a hard one.
Male bite female mid copulation. That was the first time that I've ever seen it. But he's also kind of a nippy corn snake. So
Hmm.
it didn't shock me that he actually did it.
Yeah, I think that's always fun as far as I don't know, seeing the different behaviors even between individuals, but also in between. I've had whole clutches that are like nippy little crazy
Yeah,
guys,
definitely.
and I've had some that are like chill, and they all kind of seem to be going with the flow. And it's like just the sliding spectrum, and it seems like I don't know how that's passed on or not passed on, but it's interesting.
I don't really know how that's affected, but I have noticed that blood reds, at least in my opinion, usually produce some feisty juveniles. Like they always seem to, whether or not they have like are visually blood red, just offspring of blood red individuals seem to really have produce nippy babies.
And I can't my stuff. It doesn't seem that they get to feeding very easily.
Yeah, I feel like the ones that are overly defensive usually are the ones that take the longest to get started.
I think it's unlike in ball pythons when you have like a nippy baby. That's an animal that
Yeah,
eats well typically. I feel like in corn snakes, when someone's too overworked, they get over the fact that they're having a meal and then they don't go for
yeah,
it.
exactly. Yeah, I feel like they're just like whatever's in front of me wants to eat me, and I don't care if it smells like food. It's not food, and I just need it to go away.
Yeah, exactly. So between all the babies that you have, I mean, getting them started, everything like that, what's your success off the bat? Do you try to go straight for frozen thawed, or do you start
I
live?
I, I only do frozen thawed. So yeah, right off the bat, it's just pinkies, and usually I give them like 3 feedings, and once if they haven't fed at least once in those 3 feedings, it's usually when I try, boiling or you know washing them with Dawn or something along those lines to try and get them started. But yeah, I don't typically try and feed anything live. I try and avoid it as much as possible.
Yeah. Now, is that mentioned boiling, so that's kind of your first step?
Yeah, I actually started kind of moving with doing dawning first, since I've had so much success with it in the past couple of years. Uh, but usually now, but in the past, boiling was usually my first step. Um, but now it's probably more second or third step.
So do you have, if you don't mind going through kind of all your different methods or the steps you have
Yeah.
to get baby started?
So it's usually it's basically offering them food. If they don't eat, tease feeding is usually one of the next steps.
Can you
Although,
explain a little bit? Because like I haven't had much success with that. Kind of like how we were talking about before.
yeah,
Once they get a little bit scared,
yeah,
they're totally out.
it seems to work with some more than others, but it's usually typically like if they don't eat the first time, the second time I might try tease feeding, depending on, it's more of kind of just a judgment thing based on personality of the snake. Like you were saying, like a snake that gets overworked, I'm not going to do that with them because they're not going to eat. And if I keep bashing them in that, popping them on the head with a pinky, it's just going to piss them off even more, and they're probably not even going to eat if I just stick the pinky in the tub. So it's more or less, you know, a judgment call on my part. Um, if I notice like a snake is calm, but it's like really tongue flicking and there seems to be interest, but it just doesn't want to take the next step of actually taking the pinky from me, I'll try tease feeding just to kind of get it going a little bit. It's getting more, of the scent of the pinky instead of me just dangling it in front of their face. So I would probably do it more along those lines. But if I'm not going to tease feed, I'll try dawning them, which is super easy. You just basically wash the pinky off with dawn and throw it. I just after I'm done washing it off, I just throw it in the tub, close it up and don't even bother, checking on them until the next day. Just basically leave them alone. And then if that doesn't work, at least twice I'll boil, which is basically just throwing them in boiling water, and either they will start to float or start to sink, and that's usually when I pull them out, and they're usually nice and warm, and you throw them in there. After you I usually like to let them cool off a little bit, because I'm sure, just like we would, it probably wouldn't be beneficial for the little tiny snakes to be eating a boiling hot pinky right out of the water. So yeah, and same ideas. I just throw it in the tub and just basically shut the tub and leave them alone for 24 hours and hopes that they eat the pinkies.
Yeah. And I mean, I've found, at least personally, between the boiling and just frozen thawed, I mean, that's probably like at least 95% of the baby can be good to go off that.
Yeah. Yeah. Typically, I don't have to go much further than boiling. I've had a couple here and there that, I'll have to like try braining a pinky, or sometimes just feeding a pinky head, or mice tails, adult mice tails, stuff like that, to finally get things going. But that's usually like maybe one a year or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of, people aren't used to any of those methods. They're pretty uniquely corn snake.
Yes.
I haven't, I don't know many other people that use, especially, I mean, boiling, I just learned of a couple years ago, and that was like a game changer. As well as I think people probably think it's absolutely crazy that you'd wash off with dawn dish. So
I had to like wait till I had an apartment of my own, and my own like pots and pans to actually do boiling, because I know my mom would probably have killed me if I was boiling pinkies in her pots that she was going to use to like make pasta the next day or something like that. She probably even cleaning it out, she probably would have been kicked me out of the house or something.
Well, for people who listen to the podcast know that Melissa hates me and for using the pots. Really, like, yeah, it is nasty, I gotta admit. But we do have designated kitchenware that is sinkware. It just sometimes it gets mixed up with the other stuff. Right? But that's always, I mean, corn snakes are easy to get started, but you always have a few stubborn ones.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any snakes to where, I mean, everything's going to eat right off the bat. But
I mean, there probably isn't. There's probably always, especially a lot of those snakes that, we have in captivity that we hatch out that don't eat right away, probably are just those ones in the clutch that would typically in the wild not survive. But just so happens that they're hatched out in captivity, where we can do, all these different techniques to, get them started and get them eating on their own. They're just probably the part of the clutch that, wasn't probably typically meant to do as well as the rest, which is perfectly natural, normal thing, because otherwise corn snake populations and every other snake population would be astronomical, and we can deal with it in captivity because we only pair up as many snakes as we can handle, and we can handle all the offspring, and we can we're here to put the time in to get them going, rather than it's just up to them, and if they don't eat, they don't eat, and whatever happens.
And that kind of presents us with two different trains of thought. Like you kind of touched on the fact that there are people who are the whole, if they don't eat, they're not meant to survive people, because those are the animals that wouldn't survive in the wild, which is a fair point. And then there's the people, we have them in captivity, so I'm going to try my hardest to get them going. So kind of, are you one way or the other? Are you somewhere in between?
I think I'm somewhere in between. I think, especially, this comes back to like me doing, reptile keeping as a profession, that, I'm keeping them in captivity. I'm deciding to hatch them out. It's on me to, make sure that they survive and thrive, try everything that I know, and, can try to get them going. Now, if I try everything that I can and they don't eat and they, happen to die, which does happen from time to time, I did everything I could. They probably just weren't meant to, survive, and that just happens sometimes. But again, I'll try whatever I can to get them going and keep them, living and make them thrive.
Yeah. And I think that's something to where it's usually typically around this time of year, at least for me, where it's like you start to, even those animals, like I have a few animals that I've been assist feeding for like, dude, it's November. I mean, like, you can't imagine how long I've been assist feeding them. I haven't hatched a snake since the beginning of August.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is the time where things are like weathering away, unfortunately. And like, things are just, I don't know, man. It's sad, but you try to do your best. And we always have a few pairs of corn snakes, but they're king snakes, sorry. We can, at least reuse those animals, because I mean, there is a certain time where I find that, this animal's just kind of moving slower. You'll see sometimes a baby that's really weak will kind of like, it's almost like they're dragging around like the back part of their body, like their tail and the back half of their body. Sometimes they're just laying kind of weird, like they're not, on their belly coiled up under the heat or under the hide. They are like kind of strewn out and kind of. And then I'm like, okay, yeah, that animal, unfortunately, I don't think is going to recover. But then I've had animals that have come from like the brink of absolutely nothing to become perfectly feeding, perfect animals. So it's kind of weird like that.
Yeah, I have one of my holdbacks that's now a breeder was basically that situation where it didn't eat for probably like a month, and then I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, it just like, kicked in, and it just started eating, and now it's breeding. And luckily, none of his offspring have inherited that trait so far. So hopefully that still continues, at least for the clutches that he produces.
Yeah. And I've even, now I'm trying to think what animals feed well. So can I selectively breed for feeding, which is also another thing, which sucks because the best looking babies never feed. And
I have run into that a couple of times.
And that's why I say, like, it's not only disappointing that these animals are withering away at this point of the season. It's also the fact that there's some really beautiful, amazing animals, and you don't get to choose what doesn't eat.
Yeah.
And like your favorite snake may have a kink.
Yeah.
Or like, I don't know. I've just come across these kind of unfortunate coincidences, but
I've run into a few instances where I've been breeding a combo for buff that I'm like, it's a 3 or 4 gene combo, and of course I hit that combo and it never ate, no matter what. And of course there goes that hard work of 3 or 4 years raising up snakes just to get to that point, and then you hit what you want, you're shooting for, and then it just doesn't work out because the snake doesn't want to eat.
I think that's worse than not producing it.
Yeah, I would almost rather just that pair just not lay eggs that year than hit that big combination and have it, not work out, and you just like almost kind of decimates your attitude and your disposition for that. I mean, it doesn't last forever because you have 90 other snakes that you need to take care of, but for that, at least for that moment, you're just like, why did it have to be this one?
Yeah. And I mean, what keeps you going during moments like that?
Well, I mean, I think, at least for me, I think what helps is being, a zookeeper and having, I mean, I take care of numerous animals at my job, and it's an unfortunate part of, working with animals, whether it be breeding corn snakes in your apartment or, working at a zoo, is that, animals die, and I mean, it's going to happen. But it could be, your favorite corn snake, or just your pet, or in my case, an otter that you really work with closely or something like that. It's going to happen, and it's, you just have to realize that it's a part of, doing this. You have, a whole host of other animals that you need to take care of. Yes, it sucks, and it's going to suck probably for the next couple of days, if not longer. But you just have to concentrate on the animals that are still here, and I typically just kind of focus on them, and kind of distract myself from, especially at work, kind of distract myself from what just happened and kind of focus in on, the animals that still are here, that rely on me to, make sure that they're fed and, everything, just to kind of keep myself from thinking about it too much.
And I'm sure that's much more of a muscle you need to flex at work, more so than at home, as far as like, not only do you have to move on after a day where, maybe something that is more, how dare I say, endearing than a snake or something like that, something maybe a little bit more interactive, passes away, but you also are probably working with animals of higher consequence, and you need to keep kind of your mind about you while you're kind of grieving through that.
Yeah, it's like, sometimes it can be, especially if you work with the animal every day, you do a lot of, training and stuff like that with them, where you're basically have, a very good relationship with that animal. It can be tough, but you have, the other, otters, the other snakes, other frogs, whatever, they still are relying on you. So you have to just basically, just focus on that and, do your job, and, can't let it kind of distract you from that, because if you get distracted, that's when either you're going to get hurt, an animal's going to get hurt, and then there's potential that you lose another animal just because you were distracted from actually doing your job.
Right. So are you not, you're not herps specific at work?
So I'm predominantly herps. Most of what I take care of is native to Maryland. So it's mostly native herps, a few birds. We have an aviary with native birds, and then we also have otters, bobcats, and bats. Bats aren't technically native to Maryland, but they're basically the same color, size as native Maryland bats, so they kind of use them as an analog. and they're also fruit-eating bats, so they're a lot easier to take care of than all the bats in Maryland because they all are insectivores. And then we also take care of a few things that aren't native, slender-snouted crocodiles, and one of our big projects is working with Panamanian golden frogs.
Awesome. And what frogs were those? Sorry.
Panamanian golden frogs.
Oh, so those are those that golden, I don't know if it's a dart frog, but it's basically usually you see them with dart frogs, but that are functionally extinct in the wild.
Yes. So they're part of the genus Atelopus. So they're actually a toad, even though they're called frogs. But they are considered. They're still listed by the IUCN as critically endangered, although it's thought that they're extinct in the wild. At this point, no one's seen them since the early 2000s in the wild. So the assumption now is that there are no longer any individuals, although they don't like to really, like as far as like IUCN and stuff like that does all the listing, they don't like to assume unless they're 100, they're entirely sure that there's a good chance that this species doesn't exist anymore. Seeing as that they are native to Panama and the rainforests, especially like the montane rainforest, it's still a pretty expansive area, so it's not the easiest to really go through every inch of that area and really check. So there could still be one or a few in the wild, and in that case they'd probably be functionally extinct. But for the time being, we call them critically endangered.
And are you actively trying to breed species like these?
Yeah, so Panamanian golden frogs, we have the largest colony of, we call them PGFs, in the United States. And we also have the most success breeding them. So we typically get a lot, so they're part of an SSP, species survival plan, and our herb collection manager is actually the stud bookkeeper for the SSP. And we actually get a fair amount of the recommended breeders. Like we have a fair amount of them, and we also get a decent amount from other institutions that aren't necessarily set up for breeding. So we usually bring them in and do all the breeding in-house, and kind of just go from there. And then we'll either keep offspring and raise them up here or at the zoo, and then or we'll send individuals out to other zoos and other institutes that are either want them for just exhibit stuff or want to do breeding themselves, or we do from here and there breed offspring for them to be able to do research on the species as well.
So are most of the animals, are they breeding on display, or do you guys have them set up behind the scenes?
All our breeding happens behind the scenes. We have our main majority of our collection, or PGFs wise, is split up into two parts of the hospital, the animal hospital. In one of the rooms where there aren't as many of the frogs, but there's a bunch of breeder setups, and that's where we do all our breeding. And we also have like 20 or so individuals that we keep on exhibit that we bred specifically to be exhibit animals, so they're not as genetically important to the SSP, but we just bred them for numbers so we could have someone exhibit them on display so people can see them.
So are there distinct bloodlines to where, the most genetically diverse ones are the ones that you're protecting, and then?
Yeah, so all the recommended breeders basically, they go through the entire stud book and they run individuals through genetics software. There's a geneticist that works on the SSP and basically does all that and They go through and figure out which individuals need to breed with which individuals because their genes aren't mixed together or anything like that, or they're not as well represented within the population already to hopefully make offspring that are and keep that are diverse and also keep the populations very diverse.
And are there any hopes in re-releasing these animals back into the wild?
There are some slight hopes. We get to our collection manager and our head vet have been going to Panama for quite a few years now. So I help. There's a group down there called EVAC. It's the El Valle Amphibian Conservation Center, and they have been working with not only PGS but a bunch of other amphibian species down in Panama. So they are like kind of our partner on the project, and the hopes at some point to send offspring from the ones that we have in captivity down there for them to breed, and then release.
Are they keeping and breeding as well in that facility?
They do have some. Yeah. They at this point actually have more than we do, but for a long time we actually had more than there were in Panama. But luckily, they've gone to the point where they've gotten breeding down that they can have as many or more frogs than we do, which is kind of where we need most of the frogs to be. The issue right now with Panama is that their government is a trash fire, and they're not great with conservation wise. They sell a lot of land to farmers, which basically destroy any potential habitat. Right now, a lot of the potential sites that they've kind of narrowed down are on farmland, and you basically have to beg or pay the farmers to let you use their land for reintroductions, and there's no guarantee that they're going to keep the land how it is because it's their land. They can do whatever they want. So even if you reintroduce frog on that property, who knows how well things would go. They could plow that section of land 2 months later and kill every single frog that you put out there.
And was the original decimation of the population, was that from chytrid fungus or was it something else?
So it originally was like habitat degradation and habitat loss, but then chytrid came in and basically sped their decline up exponentially to the point of what their population is now. So basically, chytrid was basically the main player in their decline, and but to begin with, it was mainly habitat loss, with just like everything else.
Do you know if chytrids, if it has been found in captive populations?
Oh yeah, it has. But chytrid's pretty much everywhere at this point, except for Antarctica and the Arctic. And
is it amphibian specific?
Yes. So it's even gotten to the point where it's frog and salamander specific. So there's BD, which is the frog version of chytrid, and there's B-sal, which is the salamander form, and Newton salamander form. So it's gotten to the point where it's even split off as far as amphibians go and only affects certain amphibians.
But there's basically different strains that affect different animals? Or?
Yeah, so basically it just evolved to be species specific. Well, I guess family specific or whatever you want to say it is. to the point where it only affects frogs and toads, or it only affects salamanders and newts and fumas and all those sorts of things.
And it's essentially like all over the world.
Yes, pretty much at this point, it's pretty much everywhere.
Wow. So what the hell do you do?
They don't really know how to get rid of it in the wild at this point.
Is it something that they never observed before and popped up?
So it kind of just popped up out of nowhere, kind of a deal. They did see it, but they didn't really realize whatever was causing issues was chytrid, because it presents a lot of times like other infectious diseases like red leg disease and things that are caused by bacteria. What they saw as red leg disease or some other like Pseudomonas infection, something like that, could have been chytrid. And basically, they're not entirely. The main theory of how chytrid got to where it was is that it originated in Africa on clod frogs, and clod frogs were used, or still are used a lot in research. So basically, that's how it got everywhere, is because it got shipped to all these places to do research on, and people were obviously touching these frogs and going, out, and would go for a hike and go touch something, and now chytrid's in that area, and all it takes is the right environment for it to really do its stuff.
I'm sad that I forget the whole story, but someone came on and was telling us about the claw frogs and something about using them as like birth control or something, or
so they were used for as pregnancy tests.
Yes.
Yeah. So they basically would.
They're basically the stick that you pee on, but it's a frog.
Yeah, and they would, if the woman was pregnant, they would lay eggs.
That's so weird.
Yeah. That was
basically like a pregnant woman's pee can make this animal reproduce.
Yeah, the hormones that are present make the female frogs produce and lay eggs.
Wow.
Yep.
So, and a random question, and I guess that's been not just for that reason, but they must be used for other reasons.
What, clod frogs?
Yeah, like in research and whatnot. Like, how do you know exactly?
I'm not sure exactly what they're used research-wise. I would assume that they're used so widely in research because they're so different than a lot of other amphibian like frogs in general, and they're relatively easy to kind of keep. They're kind of just like keeping fish that you use for research or anything like that. You can keep a lot of them in a small space because you just need a bunch of aquariums or whatever, and you can rig something up to do like water changes efficiently that you can, kind of keep them for research without, making your work that much, more taxing on yourself.
And that's the same animal that you may see at the aquarium stores that like come in different colors, and they kind of just sit there flat like they're not even alive.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and then they'll occasionally just start swimming somewhere and then fall.
Right.
Yeah.
Just usually, like randomly.
Yeah, usually the ones at the aquarium stores are like the dwarf clod frogs that usually stay that size that they are. I don't really see like the African clod, like the bear clod frogs that much anymore in like the pet trade or anything like that. But it's usually you see like the dwarf clod frogs.
Mm-hmm. And the kind of a random question from Ryan, but I guess this kind of goes for any reptile or amphibian or any animal that can be parthenogenic, is say So, so if the mother has a virgin birth, how do they handle that as far as like the stud book goes and everything like that? Like, since it's the same gene pool, since the female basically reproduced itself, are they seen genetically, inferior?
I've never run into that instance with a species that's SSP. So I'm not sure what they would do. I'm assuming since the genes are relatively, like, there should be the same, that they would consider it, the same as the female, and whatever, genes that she, like, whatever frogs that she wouldn't breed with, they wouldn't attempt to breed. We also, I'm not sure if parthenogenic offspring would be produce viable offspring. I don't know if they're sterile or anything like that. We actually at the zoo had a water snake produce parthenogenic offspring. She did it 3 years in a row.
Wow.
But this is the first time, or we've had, usually her offspring died within a year. But we've had the 3 for about 3 years now, 2-3 years. So they actually end up being all male, at least with snakes. So I don't know if anyone's done any research on the viability of, snakes or anything like that.
And I've never even heard that the offspring, at least in your case, they've been less hardy and less, able to thrive.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just a thing with the water snakes that they are not. I mean, I've heard other species having parthenogenic offspring, but I've never actually heard anything other, than them announcing that the snakes or whatever it was were born. I didn't know, haven't been any updates if anything's still alive or anything. So as far as I know, that could be an issue with parthenogenic offspring, is that they just typically don't thrive. I'm not sure. I mean, certainly in my case, my experience is they typically don't thrive unless, I don't know what's different about the 3 that we have currently that they're doing better. I don't know if it's because they were better feeders when they were born, or it was the 3rd go around, so it was, they were that much, hardier or something. But it's parthenogenesis in species where it's not a normal thing is still a pretty under researched topic.
Yeah, I mean, what a weird phenomenon just to begin with.
Yeah, especially, I mean, there are those lizard species where the entire population is only female, where that's a normal thing. But it's certainly really weird when a species that's not supposed to do it does it.
Yeah, it's like we could almost make up something to where either reptiles are evolving to become parthenogenic, in the way that they don't have to reproduce. As far as there's certain lizard species or gecko species, like you said, that they only reproduce that way. And I don't know many other animals that do that aren't reptiles.
Yeah, I think
I'm sure it could happen in humans, like once in a while. I don't know.
I don't know if it would work with.
What up, Christians? Let's figure this out. Yeah, I don't know if yeah, I mean, like I said, I only know snake stuff, but it's interesting. So I don't know if or what you work with outside of there. Are there things that aren't reptile related that you work with, or what's some of your favorite non-reptiles that you work with?
So non-reptile wise, I do like working with bats. The bats. just because they're, seen as one of those creepy crawly animals. Everyone seems to be afraid of them, and even though they're 6 inches long and weigh 5 ounces or something like that, where they wouldn't even hurt you if they ran into you. And I like working with the otters and bobcats as well. And both species have so much personality, and they're always on the go, always trying to figure things out. The otters are just like any other weasel or mustelid, or all over the place, swimming around, very active. So it always is enjoying seeing them interacting with enrichment and stuff like that, but also just kind of seeing them act as they would naturally in the zoo setting always is kind of a perk to working with them.
Yeah, I think that's an animal that has way too many human characteristics for us not to be drawn to, as far as how playful they seem and how they use their hands and stuff like that.
Even though they're entirely they seem really playful, I'm still not gonna put my hand, finger, or anything anywhere near an otter or bobcat, for that matter. That's too easy of a way to lose a finger or any other digit, and I like where my fingers are.
Is there a certain amount of allotted space that you have to give all of these animals?
Yeah, so we work what's called protected contact. So there's always a barrier between us and the animals whenever we're around them. So although it is kind of a mesh framing and caging, so there is, you could stick a finger through a hole, but we don't do that, just because of the risk of our male bobcat. Seems like, at least with me, seems like he's acts like he's like a kitten, but if I were to try and put my hand near him, he would try and bite my fingers off. He's very, rubs his head against the mesh, trying to get my attention, and then as soon as you move, he's on the ready to just swipe at your hand or bite a finger or something. Not that he would ever get the chance, but if it so happened, he would happily at least scratch me up pretty good.
Yeah, sounds like he's still a cat.
They are still very cat-like, but he'll break out of that mold very soon and be a wild cat.
Yeah, it seems like I don't even trust house cats. Let's be honest.
I don't trust them either.
They're sketchy, so I imagine a bobcat's only worse. But how do you go? Just kind of so curious. How do you go hands-on with a bat, or how do you even do health checks?
So we're pretty hands-off with bats unless they're showing any signs of illness or anything like that. Our colony happens to be an older colony. They typically live to about 12 years in captivity, and most of the bats that we have are between 8 and 10 years. So they're pretty old. So if we ever see any bats having trouble flying, anything like that, that's usually we net them and then grab them out of the net and hold them. And usually we're wearing gloves of some sort because they do have very tiny, sharp teeth. And they do, as soon as you get hands on them, like to bite you, to hopefully get you to let go. Usually if they don't try and bite you as soon as you get hands on them. That's typically another sign that things aren't going well for them. But usually, that's pretty much all you have to do, especially with a smaller bat.
And are the typical kind of wives' tales true about being bit by a bat? You're going to get rabies or something like that?
So in captivity, that's not something you usually have to worry about. A lot of the animals that are rabies vectors are vaccinated for rabies. I think the bats are vaccinated for rabies. If they're not, they're also kept securely in a enclosure to where nothing can get in except for a snake every once in a while, but nothing's going to get in there that's going to potentially give them rabies. Now, we do end up finding wild bats every once in a while on grounds, and we treat every bat like that that we find to be rabid, just because they have a high likelihood of transmitting rabies and having rabies. But we're also, a lot of the keepers that work with high risk rabies vectors are rabies vaccinated themselves. So I'm rabies vaccinated, so it doesn't fully protect you from rabies, but it helps, certainly helps keeping you from developing rabies after you've been bitten by a rabid animal.
Is there some type of like booster protocol, say if you were bit, that they could help you out with?
So typically, if you're vaccinated, like through work, we do a annual, it's called Employee Health Day, where we get blood drawn and they check your rabies titer. So basically, check to see if you have enough antibodies in your blood to do its job, and if your antibody count is too low, then they'll give you a booster. But the whole goal of getting vaccinated is, if you are bitten by a rabid animal or a potentially rabid animal, and you don't have you don't get vaccinated, you basically have to go to the hospital and get 4 shots, rabies shots. But if you're vaccinated, it lessens it to 2. And from what I've heard, the shots that you get can be rather painful. I think from what I've heard, at least one of the shots has to be on the spot where you've been bitten, which probably doesn't feel too great. So yeah, it's a nice precaution. It's also nice that we get it through the zoo, because it's not cheap either, so they cover it.
Sure. Damn, I'm glad you haven't gotten rabies. I mean, that's without being treated, it's fatal,
Yes,
right?
yeah, it's 100% fatal.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Be safe out there. So Chris, thank you so much for hanging out with us. It's been 2 hours.
Right.
So if anyone wants to reach out to you or want to find you anywhere on the internet, how can they find you?
I have a Facebook business page for Enterprise Snakes. You can get in touch with me there, or you can just find me on my normal Facebook page for my own self and get in touch with me that way as well.
Yeah, and check out his Red Factor buff. It is sweet looking. And all the other buff stuff that he's into.
There's plenty of it on my page. So
awesome. As for us, portcitypythons.com, portcitypythons, Instagram, Facebook, all that good stuff. You're listening From the Ground Up podcast. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Chris, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And we will catch you guys next week. Have a good one, Chris.
You too.
All right, I'm going to be here with you.